Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph. We're continuing to learn Hilchos Tefillin and Yirtzeh Hashem. Today we will be learning I opened up to the wrong page over here. Give me 1 second. Yeah, we will be completing Nun Ches Amid Beis, and we will be learning, I think, Nun Tes Amid Aleph as well. The Libet Torah of this year should be a Schos Refuah Shalemar from Meiri V'Rabbi Rav Agayin Shalom Ruvain Ben Shima. That's the Yeshiva Shlita. He should have a complete Refuah Shalemar, and it should also be a Schos for my daughter Miriam making chasana tonight. She's getting married, and the zivug shall eliyaf zayin. Okay, so we pick up on Nun Ches Amid Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Siman Lamed Daled Sif Beis. We learned yesterday about the difference between Rashi Tefillin and Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin. The Tefillin, both the Shal Yad and the Shal Rosh, are comprised of Dalet Parshiyos, Kadesh, V'Haya Kivayacha, Shema, and V'Haya Imishamaya. Famous Machlokes, Rashi and the Rambam, Mitzad Echad, Rabbeinu Tam, Al Tzad Sheni, what the proper order of the Parshiyos are. According to Rashi and the Rambam, the Parshiyos should go into the Tefillin chronologically in the order in which they appear in the Torah Kedosha. So the Seder would be Kadesh, V'Haya Kivayacha, Shema, V'Haya Imishamaya. According to the Rabbeinu Tam, the last 2 parshiyos are flipped so that the proper Seder is Kadesh, V'Haya Kivayacha, V'Haya Imishamaya, and then lastly Shema. Now we learned yesterday in the Mishnah Berurah that everybody agrees, Rashi, Rambam, the Rabbeinu Tam, everybody agrees that the Tefillin have to be written Kisidron, that they have to be written in the order in which they appear in the Torah Kedosha. So both according to Rashi and the Rambam and according to the Rabbeinu Tam, when the Sefer writes the Parshiyos, he has to first write Kadesh, then V'Haya Kivayacha, then Shema, then V'Haya Imishamaya. The Machlokes only is how they should appear inside the bottom of the Tefillin. Now, by the Shal Rosh, this is very simple. Write 4 individual Parshiyos on 4 individual pieces of cloth. You write Kadesh, then V'Haya Kivayacha, then Shema, then V'Haya Imishamaya, and then you insert them into the Shal Rosh in the proper order. If you're creating a Shal Rosh of Rashi Tefillin, you just insert them, Kadesh in the first bias, V'Haya Kivayacha in the second, Shema in the third, and V'Haya Imishamaya in the fourth. If you're creating a pair of Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin, so then you do Kadesh, V'Haya Kivayacha, then you insert V'Haya Imishamaya, even though it was written later, and then you insert Shema. When it comes to the Shal Yad, where all 4 parshiyos are written on 1 long piece of cloth, we learned yesterday, what do? The Sefer writes the parsha of Kadesh on the first Amud, he writes the parsha of V'Haya Kivayacha on the second parsha. Now, if he's writing Rashi Tefillin, he then writes the parsha of Shema on the 3rd column, and he then writes the parsha of V'Haya Imishamaya on the 4th and the final column, and then he inserts the parsha into the bias of the Shal Yad. If he's making a Shal Yad for Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin, so then he writes Shema on the first Amud, he writes he writes Kadesh on the first Amud, he writes V'Haya Kivayacha on the second Amud, he then skips the 3rd Amud, leaves it blank, writes Shema on the 4th Amud, so he's writing it in the proper order. Then he goes back to the blank Amud and he writes V'Haya Imishamaya on the 3rd Amud. So he wrote it in order because he wrote Shema before V'Haya Imishamaya, but V'Haya Imishamaya appears on the cloth before Shema, and then he inserts it into the Shal Yad. Okay, so here we have Rashi Tefillin and Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin. Now we go Nun Ches Amid Beis, 2 lines off the bottom, Sif Beis. What do? We see we have this Machlokes Rishonim. How do we act? What do? Says the Mechaber, Yirei Shamayim Yetze Yedei Shnehem. A true Yirei Shamayim should strive, according to the Mechaber, to be Yotze, the mitzvah say of Tefillin, according to both Shitos. Okay, how does one do that? Says the Mechaber, V'yaseh shtei zugos tefillin. He should make 2 pairs of tefillin. He should make a pair of Rashi tefillin and a pair of Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. V'yaniach shneihem. And he should put on both of them. And put on both of them means, according to the Mechaber, he's going to put both of them on at the same time. Let's go weiter. V'yechavein b'hanachosam. And the kavanah that he should have when he puts on these 2 pairs of tefillin should be ba'oisam shehem aliba dehilchasa, with the pair which is proper according to the halacha. Ani yoytze yedei chayvasi. I'm putting on 2 pairs of tefillin at the same time. My kavanah is one of them is kosher, one of them is pasul. They're not both kosher. They're either kosher according to Rashi and the Rambam, either that's the right way to make the tefillin, so in that case those are the kosher tefillin, or the right way to make tefillin is Rabbeinu Tam, and then the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin is the kosher pair of tefillin. But like we learned yesterday in the Mishnah Berurah, they're certainly not both kosher. Rabbeinu Tam tefillin according to Rashi and the Rambam are pasul. Rashi and Rambam tefillin according to Rabbeinu Tam are pasul. So when you put on the 2 pairs of tefillin, the kavanah should be that whichever pair is aliba dehilchasa, whichever pair is done the right way, ani yoytze yedei chayvasi, with that pair I want to be yoytze manchiv daraisa of the mitzvah of tefillin, v'hashar heim kiritzuos ba'alma, and the other one is like leather straps. I'm not putting it on l'shem mitzvah. And this way you don't run afoul of the problem of Baal Tosef, which we're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah. But first, the Mechaber continues and he says, you can do this. You can put on 2 pairs of tefillin at once. Ki makam yesh barosh lahanyach shtei tefillin, because there's room on the head, vertically, there's enough space in the area that you're allowed to wear tefillin, which begins at the hairline and ends at the point where a baby's head is soft, at the juncture of the fontanelle. In that area, you have room for 2 pairs of tefillin. V'chein b'zraya, and so too on the arm, on the muscle, going between the elbow and the shoulder. There's an area over there that's large enough for 2 pairs of tefillin. So that's the first thing that the Mechaber says. So to wrap up the Mechaber says, a Yerei Shamayim should strive to be Yotzeh both Rashi, Rambam, and Rabbeinu Tam. How should he do it? He should have 2 pairs of tefillin. He should put them on at the same time. What kavanah should he have? The kavanah he should have is that I'm being Yotzeh my chiyuv of tefillin with the one that's kosher aliba dehilchasa. What's the other one? The other one is ritzuos ba'alma. Okay, and then he went on to explain that you could do this because physically there's enough room both on the head and on the arm. On the area where the tefillin have to go, on both there's room for 2 pairs of tefillin. Now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut nehei on nun ches amud beis. V'yaniach, right? The words of the Mechaber was v'yaniach shneihem. You should put on both. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Somebody who is noyeg to put on 2 pairs of tefillin, yaniach shal Rashi lamata litzad haponim. The Rashi tefillin should go on first. Now, right now he's talking about the shal rosh. The Rashi tefillin should go on first, so they are going to be lower down on the head, and that's what the Mishnah Berurah terms as litzad haponim, towards the face. V'shal Rabbeinu Tam lamayla. And the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin will be up higher on the head, towards the top of the head. Now, first the Mishnah Berurah says, "V'chein kasav ha'ari zechreinu levracha." That's what the Ari says, and he says about the shalyad sheyachnis tchilo shal Rashi v'ya'amidem litzad hakosef. When it comes to the shalyad, first you should put on the shalyad of Rashi, and that should be higher up towards the shoulder. V'achareim shal Rabbeinu Tam litzad hayad, and then you put on the Rabbeinu Tam, which will be lower down towards the hand. Ushneim al hakiboires, and both of them should be on the raised part of the arm, on the muscle. V'yaniach beroishay shal Rashi lamata. And like we said, the sharosh goes on first, lower down. V'shal Rabbeinu Tam yoisel amayla. and the Rabbeinu Tam should go up higher on the head. Ushneim b'makam aroy l'tfilin, and both pairs, both by the Shalroish and by the Shalyad, both bottom should be in the area that's kosher for tefillin. Now, the Mishnah Berurah does not explain why it is this way. Why is it that the Rashi should go on first and be lower down on the head, and the Rashi should go on first and be higher up towards the shoulder? In doing research, it seems that the reason is because we have to be chayshish for the shitas. There is a shita that says that there really isn't enough room on the head for two pairs of tefillin. Even though most hold that there is enough room, but since there is a shita that holds that there isn't, we put on the Rashi tefillin first so that we're sure that the Rashi tefillin are in a place that we could be yotza, because if we're going to take a chance, we're going to take a chance with the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, we're not going to take a chance with the Rashi tefillin. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, V'haretzuos the Rabbeinu Tam, the retzuos of the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, yihiyeh mechuseh, they should be covered up, tachas retzuos the Rashi, they should be covered up by the retzuos of the Rashi tefillin. Shelo yiskalu rak retzuos the Rashi, only the retzuos of the Rashi tefillin should be exposed. So it's very clear from the whole beginning of this Mishnah Berurah is cut in hay that we're giving primacy of place to the Rashi tefillin, because lamaisa we paskin like Rashi. Me ikra din, the halach is like Rashi and the Rambam, so we're giving primacy of place to Rashi. Utfillin de Rabbeinu Tam yuktanim mitfillin de Rashi, and the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin should be smaller than the Rashi tefillin. Ayin sefer hakavanas tefillin perik yud uperik yud beis. Mi shemaniach tefillin shal yad shal das Rabbeinu Tam utfillin shal roish kedas Rashi v'harambam. Let's say somebody is stuck in some kind of a quandary, and he's got a set of tefillin, but it's a mixed set. His shalyad is a Rabbeinu Tam shalyad, his shalroish is a Rashi Rambam shalroish. Im yoytze yidei chayvasai, whether or not you could be yoytze yechiv of tefillin in this manner, pasak shvos Yaakov chelik aleph siman beis, de'ena yoytze liba de kol yalma, you're not yoytze according to anybody. You're wearing a mismatched pair over here, a yad one way, a roish the other way, you're not yoytze. Avo b'shas atchak b'tol anicham kach. But b'shas atchak you could put it on. Because we learned earlier that b'shas atchak, let's say you only have a shalroish. So you don't not put on tefillin, you put on the shalroish. And according to the Ramah, you make two brachas of putting on the shalroish. You only have a shalyad, so you make a lahanyach and you put on a shalyad. So you have a mismatched pair of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So fine, you have a shalyad of Rashi and the Rambam, you'll put on the shalyad. Now you'll put on a Rabbeinu Tam shalroish. Fine, at least you're wearing a shalyad according to Rashi. At least according to Rabbeinu Tam, you're wearing a shalroish. However, lo yevarech rak al oisei shenichtava al pi min hagenu kedas Rashi v'Rambam. However, you would only make a bracha on the Rashi one. V'im shalroish nichtava al pi das Rashi. And not only that, let's say you have a Rabbeinu Tam shalyad and a Rashi shalroish. Says the Chavetz Chaim, yesh lahaniach shalroish tchila. You should put on the Rashi shalroish before you put on the Rabbeinu Tam shalyad. Now that would be very interesting, because in that case what you would do, according to the way we paskin like the Ramah, what you would do is, you would make two brachas, you would make Asher Kedishanim b'mitzvahs of Tzivanu lahaniach tefillin, then right away you would make the bracha of al mitzvahs tefillin, and you would put on the shalroish. Then you would put on the Rabbeinu Tam shalyad without a bracha. And when you take the tefillin off, you would take off, even though normally you take off the shalroish tchila, but in this case, since you're wearing a Rashi shalroish and a Rabbeinu Tam shalyad, you would take off the Rabbeinu Tam shalyad before you take off the Rashi shalroish. Okay. The Mechaber said that the Yerei Shamayim is Yaniach Shneihem, says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Vav, Shneihem Yachad al Hayad. You should see, take a look very carefully at what the Mechaber wrote. The Mechaber said, Yerei Shamayim Yetze Yedei Shneihem, V'yaseh Shtei Zugos Tefillin, V'yoniach Shneihem. Yoniach Shneihem means put them both on. It does not mean wear them both. It means put them both on. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, what are we saying? shnehem yachad al hayad. Put both shel yads on your arm at the same time. V'yavarech. Now make a bracha of lahaniach tefillin. V'yahatkeim bebas achas, and tighten them both at the same time. So this is not, if when you read this, you thought, oh yeah, this is like people who put on Rashi tefillin and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. They put on Rashi tefillin, and then later on they put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. No, that's not what the Mechaber is talking about. What the Mechaber is talking about right now is, what you're going to do is, you're going to take the Rashi Shel Yad, you're going to place it into position on your arm. Then you're going to take the Rabbeinu Tam Shel Yad, you're going to place the Rabbeinu Tam Shel Yad into position on your arm. You have not yet made a bracha, and you have not yet tightened either one of them. Now you'll go ahead, and in your hand you're holding two ritzuas. You're holding the ritzua of the Rashi and the ritzua of the Rabbeinu Tam. And now you're going to make a bracha asher kedushanim b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu l'niach tefillin. And now you're going to tighten both of them. Tighten the Rashi one and the Rabbeinu Tam one, and put them both on together at the same time. V'hu adin b'shal roish. And you're going to follow the same procedure with the shal roish. You're going to put on the Rashi shal roish, get it into position. Put on the Rabbeinu Tam shal roish, get it into position. Then you're going to make the bracha of al mitzvahs tefillin, and then you're going to tighten them both around your head. Kidei shetiyeh hanacha shteyem samach lebracha. By doing this, you're making the bracha, you're making the brachas, and you're putting on the two pairs of tefillin together at the same time, samach lebracha, right when you made the bracha. And this way the bracha will be chal on both pairs of tefillin. Okay, Ois Cotton Zion. The Mechaber said, v'yechavein b'hanachosam, you should have kavanah when you put on these two pairs of tefillin, that you're going to be yoitza with the one that's a liba d'hilchasa. So if the Rashi tefillin are a liba d'hilchasa, you want to be yoitza the mitzvah of tefillin with the Rashi tefillin. If the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin are a liba d'hilchasa, you want to be yoitza the mitzvah of tefillin with the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. Says the Mishnah Berurah, D'lo yuchal l'chavein b'shteihem be'eis hahiduk shemahad kon yachad l'shem tefillin. You can't make the bracha of asher kedushanim b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu l'niach tefillin and go tighten Rashi tefillin and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin and have kavanah to be yoitza the mitzvah of tefillin with both of them. Can't do that. Why not? Oh, says the Mishnah Berurah, taharei echad mehem einay tefillin, because one of them is not tefillin. One of them is not kosher. You can't be yoitza with that one. V'yesh oimrim oid, and not only that, there are those that say there's an even bigger problem. The yesh bazeh mishum bal toisif, because maybe you're being over the issa daraisa of bal toisif. If on Sukkot you go ahead and you take 5 minim instead of 4, you take a lulav, an esrig, a hadas, and a rava, and a branch from an apple tree, and you go ahead and you hold all of them together, and you want to be yoytz the mitzvah with chamisha minim. That's bal toisif. If you make a shel roish, and you put on a 5th bias on the shel roish, and you stick another parsha in there, you'll be going for a bal toisif. Now, the sugya of bal toisif, I'll just tell you right away, the sugya of bal toisif is very complex. What we're going to say over here on bal toisif is totally on a bunch of machlokes in Rishonim. There are at least 4 different shittas in the Rishonim of what it takes to be over bal toisif and what you have to do to make sure that you're not over on bal toisif. So we're going to speak kind of like from 30,000 feet. I'm not going to do a deep dive into the sugya of bal toisif right now. We're talking from 30,000 feet, aliba de hilchasa, aliba de chavetz chaim in the Mishnah Berurah. That's what we're going to follow. But says the Mishnah Berurah, and he brings this down here from the Bach, and the Bach and the Taz, whether or not this bal toisif is midaraisa or midarabanan, but he says you're running the risk of bal toisif by putting on 2 pairs of tefillin at the same time. Al kalpanim midarabanan, at least bal toisif darabanan. So therefore, says the Mechaber, you should be very careful, and we're going to see, I hope, later on in the shir, a very interesting bir halacha. I hope we get to it. You should be mechaven that you're only being mekayim the mitzvah with the one that's a liba d'ilchasa. And the other ones are ritzuas ba'alma. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton ches ba'alma, shaharei mimanu shachechad behem pasel. Because certainly one of these pairs of tefillin are pasel. The kadal b'sif cotton aleph. We spoke about this in yesterday's shir. It's Sifkat and Aleph. We said according to Rashi, the Rambam, Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin are puzzle. According to Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi, Rambam Tefillin are puzzle. V'davka bazeh einoi over al Bal Tosef. Only in this way, says the Chavetz Chaim, can you be sure that you're not being over Bal Tosef. Why? Sheyesh bazeh shtayim l'mal yusa. Because now, following the Eitzah of the Mechaber, we have two factors that work in our favor to make sure that we're not being over Bal Tosef. What are the two factors? The Mishnah Berurah explains. Sheyesh bazeh shtayim l'mal yusa. Aleph, she'echad mehem hu pasel. One factor we have working in our favor is that one of these tefillin are definitely pasel. And since it's pasel, it's not negated to the mitzvah of tefillin, and it's not Bal Tosef. You're not being over Bal Tosef with that. You're not being over Bal Tosef because you're not being mekayim the mitzvah with that. It's pasel. That's one factor. Beis, shekol echad oimid bifnei atzmoi. Each pair of tefillin, each bias, is a separate entity. You see, there's a shita in the Rishonim that holds that in order to be over Bal Tosef on something like tefillin, what you would have to do is, the Torah Kedosha says, "Ukeshartam la'oisal yodecho l'toitafais beinenecha." And from the word toitafais, we learn out that the bias of the shel rosh has to have 4 batim. If you go ahead and you attach a 5th bias to the shel rosh, now you're over Bal Tosef, because the Torah Kedosha said 4, and you made 5. But if you take an extra bias and you put on an extra bias, we don't look at it that you're being moisif on the mitzvah. I'm not being moisif on the Torah's mitzvah. See, if I make 5 batim, I was moisif on the Torah's mitzvah. The Torah's mitzvah was daled batim, you made hey batim. But if you put on a second pair, I'm putting on a second pair of tefillin that have 4 parshas. I'm putting on a second pair of shel rosh that has 4 batim. But I'm not being moisif on the mitzvah. I'm just trying to be yotze the mitzvah twice at the same time. But that's not called a hisafa. So says the Mishnah Berurah over here that the Mechaber is telling us what the Mechaber is telling us to protect us from Bal Tosef, because we have 2 factors working for us. One is that the second pair bechlal is pasel, so it's not tefillin. I'm not being moisif on the mitzvah of tefillin. This thing that I'm putting on is not tefillin. Second of all, it's a guf acher. I'm not being moisif onto the kosher tefillin that I'm wearing. I'm putting on another thing. That's not called a hisafa. That's not Bal Tosef. Again, this is just a very high level explanation. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. Avalim heniach, we're like 4 lines down in the Mishnah Berurah here on the Testament Aleph. Avalim heniach shnei zugos tefillin kisherim. But let's say you would put on 2 kosher pairs of tefillin at the same time. You'll put on 2 pairs of Rashi tefillin at the same time. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if you would put on 2 kosher pairs of tefillin at the same time, or you make a shel rosh with 5 batim, whether you originally created this shel rosh with 5 batim, or you made it out of 4 batim, and then you attached a 5th bias onto it, then you would be over Bal Tosef. Because in those 2 cases, in the first case, you're putting on 2 kosher pairs. You're putting on 2 kosher pairs at the same time. There are Rishonim to hold you're over Bal Tosef. The Torah says put on 1 pair of tefillin. You're putting on 2 pairs of tefillin. And it really is 2 pairs of tefillin because they're both kosher. See, in our case, you're putting on Rashi and Rambam tefillin and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. One of them are not tefillin because one of them are puzzle. But if you put on 2 Rashi tefillin, you're putting on 2 pairs of kosher tefillin. That's Bal Tosef. In the second case, where you put on a bias, a shel rosh, with 5 batim, you're over Bal Tosef, even though it's puzzle. There's no such thing as a shel rosh with 5 batim. That's not a kosher shel rosh. But over there, also you're over Bal Tosef, because the Torah Kedosha says 4 batim, and you made 5. Vayin b'Biur Agra shemashma b'dvarav. He says, take a look at the Biur Agra where it is implied that afilu im abayis hachamishi lo yichiber oisei legamri im ha'arba batim. Even if you create a fifth bias on the Shal Rosh and you don't mamish connect it to the other four batim, rak b'kshira ba'alma. You'll make a little leather compartment and you tie it on to the Shal Rosh. It's mashma from the Biur Agra that alone would make you be over Bal Tosef. Afilu haki pasal lahatfilin al yedei zeh. The svara of the Gra is that would render the Shal Rosh pasal. And if it's significant enough to render the Shal Rosh pasal, so if it's considered an attachment of a fifth bias in order to render the Shal Rosh pasal, then it's also a fifth bias to make you over on Bal Tosef. Umemela over alalav the Bal Tosef. Okay. All right. Now we're going to go weiter in the Mechaber, Nun Tes Amud Aleph, near the end of the line. Now again, we have to remind ourselves of what the Mechaber said so far. The Mechaber said so far, what should the Yerei Shamayim do? The Yerei Shamayim should mamish put on 2 pairs of tefillin at the same time. Put on 2 shel yads, make the bracha, tighten them both, wind them both on. Put on 2 shel roishes, make the bracha, tighten both shel roishes, and said the Mechaber, you could do that because there's enough room on the head, there's enough room on the arm. Now says the Mechaber, near the end of the top line, the Tes Amud Aleph, V'em eino yedei lechavein hamakayim u'lohaniach shneim yachad. Let's say you don't have the ability, if you think about it, to do what I described, takes a certain amount of dexterity with your fingers and everything else. You're putting on 2 shel yads, you're making a bracha, you're tightening both of them at the same time. Says the Mechaber, V'em eino yedei lechavein. If somehow you cannot do this, lechavein hamakayim, he says that you have difficulty kind of putting them both in the proper position at the same time. U'lohaniach shneim yachad. If you don't have the ability to put them both on at the same time, says the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Tes. I'm not sure if I'm going to do the whole Ois Katan Tes, but let's see. Pirush, what does the Mechaber mean? Kishiyahadek shneim bebasachas. If you attempt to do what the Mechaber said and tighten them both at the same time, lo yuchal lechavin hamokim shiyeh kol echad munach al mekoyim kadin. If you're not going to be able to do it, because if you try to do it, one of them is going to end up in the wrong place on the arm, where you're not yotzei the mitzvah. Al Kain, says the Mishnah Berurah, tzarich lekashram al kalpanim tekev zeh achar zeh b'li hefsek. At least you should do one right after the other without a hefsek. Now let's jump back into the Mechaber. Now that we saw this part of Ois Katan Tes, we understand what the Mechaber is saying. Let's go back to the Mechaber. So the Mechaber says, if you do not have the ability to go ahead and tighten both of them at the same time and make sure that they're both going to be in a makayim on the zraya, where you're going to be yotzei the mitzvah, so then what should you do, says the Mechaber? Yoniach kedivrei echad, put on one, like Rashi or the Rambam, shel yad v'shel roish. So let's say, take the Rashi shel yad, make the bracha, tighten it, put on the shel yad, take the Rashi shel roish, make a bracha, put on the Rashi shel roish, tighten it. Now skip the words in the brackets in the Mechaber. V'yisalke miyad. Skip those words. V'yaniach ha'acherim. Then right away take the second pair. So now take the second shel yad, put on the second shel yad without a bracha. Take the second shel roish, put on the second shel roish without a bracha. Al smach bracha harishona. And do all this based on the first bracha. So again, the first eights of the Mechaber was your mamish going to put on the Rashi tefillin and the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin at the same time. You're going to put on 2 shel yads, make a bracha, tighten them both at the same time, wind them both on at the same time. Then you're going to put on 2 shel roishes, make a bracha, tighten them both at the same time. Says the Mechaber, what if you can't do that? It's physically demanding. It's physically difficult to do it. Then, says the Mechaber, put on one. So you put on one shal yad, make the bracha, lahaniach tefillin, put it on. Put on one shal rosh. So let's say you started with the Rashi. Put on the Rashi. Now put on the Rashi shal rosh, make the bracha, put it on. Now, right away, immediately, leave the Rashi tefillin where they are, leave them on, but right away take the Rabbeinu Tam shel yad, put on the Rabbeinu Tam shel yad, don't make a bracha, you're still working based on the original bracha that you made. The original lahaniach is going to go now on the Rabbeinu Tam shel yad. Put on the Rabbeinu Tam shel yad, now grab the Rabbeinu Tam shel rosh and put it on over the shel Rashi shel rosh. Again, without a bracha, you're going to be saimich on the al mitzvah tefillin that you made when you put on the Rashi. And again, you're wearing the shel yad, you're wearing two shel yads and two shel roshes at the same time, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, but you didn't put them on at the same time. Now let's complete Mishnah Berurah's cotton test. We're 3 lines into the ice cotton. The brachas that you made when you put on the first pair will cover the putting on of the second pair as well. That's what the Mechaber means when he says that you're putting on the second pair al smach bracha rishona, relying on the first bracha that you made. It means put on the second pair next to the first pair. So the only difference between the first eights of the Mechaber and the second eights of the Mechaber is that in the first eights you're mamish putting them on at the same time. In the second eights you're not putting them on at the same time, but you are going to wear them at the same time. First, you should put on one pair, the shal yad and the shal rosh. And then you put on the second pair, relying on the first set of brachas. We take out the 5 words that are in brackets here. On the second line of the Mechaber, we have 2 words, v'yisalke miyad. We take out those words. And on the last line, which we're about to do now, we take out the 3 words, v'yesh omrim she'im. Ois kat yod aleph kedivrei ha'echad. First, you should put on one set, the shal yad and the shal rosh, of one opinion. HaMechaber sasam dvarov. The Mechaber wrote this in a very general way. He didn't specify which pair you should put on first. He said put on one. So from the Mechaber, it sounds like pick one. Either the Rashi tefillin or the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, and put them on first. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. According to the conclusion of the Achrayim, it is more important you should put on the Rashi tefillin first, so that they are mamish samach to the bracha. Ois cotton yud beis. You put on the shal yad and the shal rosh. Laha mechaber bebracha achas. According to the Mechaber Shita back in Siman Chaf Hey, when you put on a shal yad and a shal rosh, you only make one bracha. You make a lahaniach tefillin. Olafimin hagenu b'shtei brachas. According to the Ramah, we make 2 brachas. So you make a lahaniach on the shal yad and an al mitzvahs on the shal rosh. V'chanal b'Siman Chaf Hey. Then you're going to put the second pair on your body, on your arm, and on your head next to the first pair. Even though it's funny, because you're making a lahaniach on the first shel yad that you put on. Now the intention is that lahaniach is also going to cover the second shel yad that you put on. Yet, between the time that you put on the first shel yad and when you put on the second shel yad, you're going to be mafsik by putting on a shel rosh, right? He says the Chavetz Chaim, that hefsik is not a problem. He says, "V'af apisha mafsik beineim ba'anachas shel rosh shel hazug harishon, v'gam ba'bracha shemavarach aleh lefi min hagenu," and you're going to make another hefsik according to us. Not only are you going to be mafsik with the putting on of the shal rosh, you're also going to be mafsik b'dibur, because you're going to make a lahaniach on the first shal yad, then you're going to make an al mitzvahs on the first shal rosh. Then you're going to put on the first shal rosh. Only then are you going to put on the second shal yad. So between the time that you made the lahaniach and when you put on the second shalyad, you made a bracha of al mitzvahs, and you put on the first shel rosh. Says the Chofetz Chaim, that's not a problem. Afilu haki shaper dami tashnei brachas al tarvayu koi, because all of the brachas that you're making here are going on both sets of tefillin. Aval yuchal aniach b'tchila hashtayim shel yad mishtei azugos v'achar kach hashtayim shel rosh. You see, you might think that there's a better way to do this. Make a lahaniach, put on the Rashi shel yad, tighten it, put it on, done. Now put on the Rabbeinu Tam shel yad. So I just made a lahaniach, and I'll put on both shel yads. Now I'll make it al mitzvahs, put on the Rashi shel rosh, and then put on the Rabbeinu Tam shel rosh. Why not do it that way? That way you have no hefsekos. Why are you telling me put on the whole Rashi set? First the shel yad, then the shel rosh, and then come back and put on the Rabbeinu Tam shel yad. Why should we do it that way? Explains the Chofetz Chaim, you can't do it the other way. You can't put on the Rashi shel yad, then put on the Rabbeinu Tam shel yad, then put on the Rashi shel rosh. You know why? Because says the Chofetz Chaim, lo yuchal lo nyak b'tchila hashtayim shel yad mishtei azugos v'achar kach hashtayim shel rosh. Denimtza mafsik ben shel yad la shel rosh b'hanachas hashniyim. Because then you're being mafsik between the first shel yad and the first shel rosh. And remember, we learned that you're not allowed to be mafsik between the shel yad and the shel rosh. As soon as the shel yad goes on, the shel rosh has to go on. So we don't want to be mafsik between the shel yad and the shel rosh. Okay, let's go a little weiter. Bottom line of the Mechaber, middle of the line, we're going to skip the words v'yesh oimrim she'im. Says the Mechaber, v'im lo yuchal lahaniach bebasachas. Now the Mechaber is saying, let's say you can't wear both sets of tefillin at the same time. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yud Gimel. Lo yuchal, pirish. What does that mean? Afilu b'zachar zeh lo yuchal lahaniach bebasachas. You can't even put on a Rashi set and a Rabbeinu Tam set, one after the other, meaning to wear them at the same time. You can't do that. Why can't you do it? Says the Chofetz Chaim, maybe kigon sheish loymaka. Maybe somebody has some kind of a bruise or a wound, ve'ein loymakom l'shtein, and because of that, he simply doesn't have enough room to put them both on at the same time. Sorry, excuse me. So, we said that there's room on the head for both pairs. But let's say you've got a wound on the head. So now you only have room to put on one pair. You can't put on both pairs. Or you're going to walk into shul wearing two pairs of tefillin at the same time and people are going to look at you like you're a kook. So that's the scenario that the Mechaber is addressing now. So I'm going to go back into the Mechaber now, even though we didn't finish Eis Cut and Yud Gimel. Let's go back into the Mechaber now that we understand the scenario. Says the Mechaber, if you're not able to wear both pairs at the same time, what should you do? Yaniach shal Rashi, you should put on the Rashi pair, v'yavarech aleim, with brachas, v'yiu alav b'shas kriya shema utfila, and you should wear the Rashi pair when you say kriya shema, when you daven Shemona Esrei, v'achar tefila, and after davening, yaniach shal Rabbeinu Tam b'loy bracha, you should put on the Rabbeinu Tam tefillah without a bracha, v'yikra behem shema v'haya im shemaya, and you should say two parshas of Kriya Shema, Shema and v'haya im shemaya. Why those two parshas and not the third parsha of Vayomer? Because it's the first two parshas of Kriya Shema that say Ukishartem la'ois al yadecha v'ayulu taitafa ispein einecha. And we want to make sure that you're not made edu sheker ba'atzmai. We don't want you to take a risk that maybe you said Kriya Shema without wearing kosher tefillin. So when you put on the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, say Kriya Shema again, but you only need to say those two parshas. You don't need to say the third parsha. Let's go back to Nun Tes Amud Aleph. Start Eis Yud Gimel again from the beginning. Lo yuchal, if you're unable to wear two pairs at the same time, pirish, afilu b'zachazela yuchal laniach b'basachas. You can't wear them both at the same time. Even if you put on one after the other, you can't do it. Why not? You have a wound, you have a bruise, and you can't put two on. So then what should you do? Because the Rashi tefillin are the ikar ladina. V'shal Rabbeinu Tam, and these words are very important in the Chavetz Chaim. V'shal Rabbeinu Tam, yoniach achar tefillah, the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin you'll put on after davening, kidei lotzeis l'divrei hakoil, in order to be yotzeh the mitzvah of tefillin according to all Rishonim. V'ayin be'bir halacha, and he says, take a look at the bir halacha. Shaychachnu, where we prove, d'ma'oid sarach lihizayer, that people who put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin have to be very careful. Shelo yechavein b'hanachosam rak mishum sveika, that their kavanah when they put on the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin is only to be yotzeh al yidei safek. In the words of the Chavetz Chaim, there's a sveika dedina. We have a safek because there's another sheet of Rabbeinu Tam. So in case the halach is like Rabbeinu Tam, I want to be yotzeh like Rabbeinu Tam. V'loy b'stama l'shem mitzvah. But you should not have kavana when you put on the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin that I'm doing it stam l'shem mitzvah tefillin to be yotzeh in the mitzvah tefillin. No, I'm doing it mitzad safek. If the halach is like Rabbeinu Tam, then I want to be yotzeh with these tefillin. But if the halach is like Rashi and the Rambam, then it's like Ritzuis Ba'alma. Very important to have that kavana. Now, I don't have time to do it now, but I think tomorrow we'll do the bir halacha here on New Testament Beis, Yoniach Shel Rabbeinu Tam, to understand what's behind these words of the Chavetz Chaim. Now let's go to Ois Katan Yodalad V'achar Tefillah. The words of the Mechaber were that you'll put on the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin after davening. Hainu kedina mavur le'el b'siman chafei sif yud gimel. After davening means, like we said in Siman chafei sif yud gimel, means after Ashrei V'Olotzion. V'loi ke'elu achol tefillin derashi u'manichin derabbeinu Tam tekef lacha kedusha shel shmona esrei. Says the Chavetz Chaim, not like some people do, that they take off the Rashi tefillin after kedusha, and during Chazaras Hashatz they're busy putting on the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. He says, no, don't do that. Not only is it a problem that it's keneged what we learned at Siman Chaf Hey, that you should be wearing the Rashi tefillin until after Kedushas of Olotzion. Gam tzarich lechavin b'tefillah shmona esrei la'shliach tzibur. By Chazaras Hashatz, you're supposed to be paying attention to Chazaras Hashatz. You're not loy lasik b'davar acher. You shouldn't be busy doing something else. Ois Katan Tezvav Shema Vaya Mishamaya. Aval ein tzarich parshat sisis. We don't need to say vayomer ki cheshasha d'shem heyad ed sheker kvar tikun b'shtei parshiyos, like I explained. V'ayin b'prima gadim and the bashma minei dechen yesh linig aminiach tefillin d'Rabbeinu Tam sheyanichenu rak la'achar shesilek d'Rashi. This is what we should do. He brings from the Prima Gadim that people who put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin should follow the third eitzah of the Mechaber, not to wear them both at the same time, but to put on the Rabbeinu Tam tefillin after davening. Upashat t'misha loivish kala yom tefillin shenachin yosef sheyilbash tefillin d'Rashi. Somebody who wears tefillin all day should wear Rashi tefillin. Okay, I thought we would get a little further and I'd be able to do the Bir Halacha, but I do want to do the Bir Halacha Mirz Hashem tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me for Leaving Out Torah. The source of Leaving Out Torah should be begging against Klal Yisrael. The Rabban Shalom should send Yeshua Sefuas Parnas and Shedruchim to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the Bias Koil Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu. Everybody, we should share simchas by Klal Yisrael. Be well. Bye bye.